What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to share with you something that changed my life. How I went from a struggling language learner to having full Mandarin conversations in just months. And I'm going to break down the 8 things that I use to learn languages much quicker than most people think is possible. Now, without further ado, how did I do it? That's exactly what I'm about to share with you. So technique number 1 is prioritize acquisition-driven input. To be completely honest with you, most language learning courses have it totally backwards. They make you speak from day one, they drown you in useless grammar rules, and then they have you translating back and forth in your head because that's all they get you to practice. But that's not how you learned your first language, was it? Now this brings me to acquisition-driven input. This is like a refined evolution of linguist Dr. Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input hypothesis. The key difference is that with traditional comprehensible input, we're kind of just looking for anything that is moderately understandable to us. But with acquisition-driven input, we're actually going online, like on YouTube, and finding content that was specifically designed to be comprehensible. And so the people that are making the content act with very intentional actions, or they use gestures from which you can derive meaning. In this way, the content that you're looking for is intentional as opposed to incidental. I spent the first part of my Mandarin study journey entirely on input. Now, for the most part, I was listening to content that was slightly above my level. It wasn't random Chinese TV shows where I understood literally nothing, but carefully selected content that I understood somewhere around 75% just through the actions or the gestures that I saw on screen. The remaining 25% of the content was the content that I was able to gradually pick up by inferring it through the other comprehensible 75%. Now, the key with this is finding what linguists are calling the I+1 principle. This is material that is just above your current level. Get it? I, as in me right now, +1, a little bit harder than where I am. This is said to create the perfect balance of challenge and comfort for your brain, because the majority of it you can understand, but the 25% that you can't, you begin to absorb simply from context. Now, to be honest, nowadays I'm actually more convinced that we don't need as comprehensible as we thought of input to really get our brain to learn a new language. I actually think that we can use slightly more difficult content and still learn just fine. Now, if you're interested in my opinion on this matter, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll make a video on this in the future. I created a strict schedule for myself where I consumed at least a few hours of comprehensible or acquisition-driven input every single day. Now, this massive exposure to the spoken form of your target language is what actually constitutes the quickest path to conversational fluency. Now, technique number 2, master high-frequency vocabulary. Did you know that the most frequent 1,000 words in any given language actually make up for 75% of that language by volume? When I started with Mandarin, I didn't just randomly grab some vocabulary list and start studying it. Instead, I was laser focused on the most important words for Mandarin speakers. I both downloaded and created my own high-frequency flashcard deck before doing anything else, so I could make sure that the words I was going to encounter the most often were already familiar in my brain. Now, this meant that I could start understanding basic conversations much faster than some traditional approach. Think of high-frequency vocab as the foundation of a building. If you build a strong foundation first, then everything else can be built on top of it more securely and a little bit more quickly. Technique number 3, I used advanced close deletion flashcards. This technique honestly was a game changer for me. Now, most people will use the old-fashioned paper flashcards where they write the word that they want to learn on the front and then the English translation of that word on the back. But I'm going to tell you the truth. That is incredibly inefficient. Instead, like I mentioned, I used the system of close deletion inside of the Anki software. Rather than memorizing just isolated words, I created cards with full sentences with a single word missing from that sentence. This forced my brain to understand the word from context, which is the way we naturally acquire language. You can kind of see what I was doing here. Essentially, I was taking the comprehensible input hypothesis and just pasting it over to my flashcard approach. For example, instead of a card that says 苹果 and on the back says apple, I created a card that says something like 我喜欢吃, and then I would have a blank, and on the back would say 苹果 in Mandarin. This approach doesn't just teach your brain what the word is, but it also shows you how to use it in a native-like sentence. Now, I confess, the first time that I came across that card inside of Anki, I may have had to translate it into English on my computer or on my phone, so I got an idea of what this meant, especially if I didn't know any of the words on the card. But very soon, I wouldn't need to use that translation feature anymore. I would begin to recognize the shape of the characters so that, again, I could begin to guess the missing words word from context. Now, what really accelerated this process was that most of the cards that I made were actually using other high-frequency words so that I was continuously exposed over and over and over to high-frequency words, both on the front and on the back of these flashcards. Technique number 4, practiced intentional output. One of the biggest mistakes that I see language learners make is trying to speak too early. Now, I know some people hate this analogy, but you remember what I said earlier about how babies learn a language? They listen for months before properly speaking. Well, I waited a few months until I seriously started practicing my output practice too. After that small amount of time, I was able to refer to my own internal mental model of the language to determine whether or not what I was saying was accurate. Now, of course, I didn't get it right 100% of the time, but at least I had a more or less reliable model in my head to refer to. Now, when I did start speaking, I used 3 distinct techniques. The first is shadowing, repeating exactly what a native speaker says with as little delay as possible. The second is echoing, repeating phrases after hearing them, focusing on perfect pronunciation. The difference between shadowing and echoing is that with echoing, you intentionally wait a few seconds after hearing the native speaker before repeating. And the third technique was self-talk, having conversations with myself in Mandarin about my day-to-day activities. Self-talk, as awkward as it may sound, was actually extremely powerful. I would narrate what I was doing as I was making breakfast, for example. It did feel ridiculous at first, just talking to myself in the kitchen, but after a while, hearing the clanks of dishes while muttering to myself in Mandarin kind of got normal. But this practice was incredibly powerful because I got used to feeling Mandarin emerge from my mouth. Technique number 5 was implementing structured daily routines. Consistency will demolish just about any natural talent advantage that anybody has. I tracked just about every minute I spent learning Mandarin actively in a spreadsheet that I made. I woke up every day really early to do my intensive Mandarin sessions. I would sit down at my desk, normally just incredibly groggy, pound my glass of room temperature water, and just get to work. Like I mentioned, I committed a minimum of about 2 to 3 hours, sometimes more, every single day without exception. This routine created the momentum that made language learning smoother and quicker over time. Let me be very clear with this point. There is no language hack out there that can replace consistent practice, period. Technique number 6. Avoid some of the more common language learning pitfalls. Okay, let's talk about what not to do. These are language learning mistakes that keep almost every language learner stuck, and sometimes for years. First, in my opinion, avoid premature output. Do not try and speak from day one. The reason why is your pronunciation is going to be terrible, and you might begin to create bad habits that later you're going to have to unlearn. Second, stop translating everything to English in your head. This will create a permanent crutch in your head that will slow you down. And here's the thing, if you're one of those people that are stressed that you can't stop translating in your head, it just means you need more immersion. It's not this active thing that you can decide to give up and just press a button and all of a sudden stop translating. It just means you need to immerse more, and naturally you're going to stop doing it. The third pitfall is stressing out over grammar rules early on. Again, in my opinion, grammar should be observed from input, not directly studied out of a textbook, unless you really like doing that kind of thing. Fourth is don't use language learning apps exclusively. Most popular language learning apps, I'm looking at you Duolingo, are designed to be addictive, not effective. I actually made some of these mistakes myself when I was studying Japanese before I started studying Mandarin. With Mandarin, I actually skipped studying grammar altogether and just observed what grammar patterns there were through massive exposure to input. The difference was night and day. Technique number 7. Leverage AI for personalized study. This technique was not available to old school language learners, but luckily for those of you who are starting now, you have a ton of resources at your disposal. I would use ChatGPT to create customized mini stories at my reading level so that I could acquire specific vocabulary. Despite what I just said, I should mention that I didn't really prioritize reading at all in my language learning journey, at least not for the most part, and that's because I was laser focused on becoming conversational as quickly as possible. However, on the rare occasion that I did want to read something, I had ChatGPT build me a mini story just like I mentioned a second ago. Sometimes I would have it tell me stories that I already knew the plot of relatively well, like something like Lion King, and then I would basically just get it to adapt that story to a reading level according to a standardized test of the language I was learning. So if it was Mandarin, it would be maybe HSK2 or HSK3, and if it was Japanese, it might be JLPT5 or JLPT4. The true power of this approach is personalization. As you know, traditional materials are a one-size-fits-all, either you get it or you don't. For the most part, you don't. Technique number 8. Optimize study timing and energy management. I believe that when you study is just as important as how you study. I discovered that my brain was most responsive to language acquisition very early in the morning. And that's why I woke up at 4 a.m. or sometimes earlier to do my large input sessions. And look, I am not saying that you need to wake up that early to do your input sessions. Please do not hate me in the comments. But this approach really helped me because 1, my brain wasn't already exhausted from a long day of work or dealing with situations that came up, and 2, the world was asleep. There was no one to distract me and I could just get my immersion hours in. The key really is just finding when your brain is the most receptive and studying at that time, whatever time that might be. Now, here's a small hack. I also strategically used caffeine to supercharge my study sessions when I knew I had a long one ahead of me. I've actually found that it's not always an attention thing when you're doing long sessions. Sometimes it's a wakefulness thing. I would time my caffeine pill or my coffee intake about 30 minutes before I was about to do a really intense study session. This might sound extreme, but I treated language learning like athletes treat training. They have designed and precise training schedules to ensure results. I just took that and applied it to my language learning. So there you have it, the 8 techniques that I used to become conversational in Mandarin in under 7 months. To recap: 1. Prioritize acquisition-driven input. 2. Master high-frequency vocabulary first. 3. Use advanced close deletion flashcards. 4. Practice intentional output techniques. 5. Implement structured daily routines. 6. Avoid common language learning pitfalls. 7. Leverage AI for personalized study content. And 8. Optimize study timing and energy management. If you're serious about learning a language as quickly as possible, I've taken everything that I've learned and put it into Fluency Formula, a complete system designed to help you achieve conversational fluency through structured practice and community support. Check out the link in the description to learn more. Whether you want to learn Mandarin like I did or any other language, the principles that you learn today work universally. So I hope that you found 1 or 2 of them at least that you can use in your language learning routine. Now, if you liked this video but want to see more about how you can teach yourself a new language in record speed, then check out this video right here where I show you step by step exactly what I did to teach myself Mandarin. Remember, you don't need some sort of special talent or God-given gift to learn a language properly. You just need the right system. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.